Imagine having a go-to resource that helps tenants navigate eviction policies and protections with just a few clicks. That's what the Tenant Policy Atlas is designed to do. This interactive map makes it easy to access information on municipal tenant relocation and assistance policies and bylaws, as well as the province of British Columbia's Residential Tenancy Act. Today, we're speaking with the team behind this innovative tool, exploring how GIS is used to empower renters, inform housing policy, and protect communities. Let's dive in. Welcome back to Geographical Thinking. I'm Michelle Brake, and I'll be your guide as we explore ideas, stories, and conversations through the lens of geography. Joining me today are Tibren, Kelly-McKinnon, Director of Fund Delivery and Impact, and Cameron Glover, Planning Analyst. Can you each give us a little bit of insight into your background and your journey to your current role today?
I'll start, Michelle, and thank you for the introduction. I actually come from a bit of a geography background back in the ArcMap and ArcInfo days. I know we've evolved a lot since then. Following graduation, I went on a bit of a circuitous route. I started in planning consulting, working here, but also abroad in places like Dubai, and then ended up in a small, mid-sized suburb here in Metro Vancouver, working for their real estate team. And by nature of some of my volunteering in the real estate community, I ended up getting in contact with Katie, who's, of course, the CEO of the Rental Protection Fund. At the time, the only employee. I joined about a year and a half ago. We started as a small but fierce team of three, and we've since grown by bringing on such talented folks as Cameron here, one of my exceptional planning analysts.
Yeah. If Tibren's journey here was circuitous, mine is completely left field. So my original schooling was in bioinformatics, which, long story short, is the treating of your biological data, biological information as data. And so it gave me a lovely background in data science, and then also just computer thinking. And then that was what really drew me towards GIS. I've always been fascinated by maps. When I was a kid, on road trips, I'd just sit in the back and I would just look. I wouldn't look out the window. I'd just look at the map, the road map we'd bought for it. And so that was what led me to go back to school for GIS. And then that was what led me to the Rental Protection Fund as an intern. So the Tenant Policy Atlas, which we're going to talk about today, was sort of one of my projects while I was interning here. And Tibren liked it, and I am still here. So, yeah.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for giving us a bit of insight into how we got here today. I'm so glad to have you both join us today. Thank you again. Welcome to Geographical Thinking officially. I'm wondering, how are things at this time of year? I know coming into spring, is it busy season? I know like real estate people are getting ready for like summer rush. Is that a thing in rental protections?
You know, it's funny. A good real estate agent will always tell you that it's a time to buy. It's never a time to not buy. But we're particularly busy at this point. We're looking at a couple dozen properties across the province. And I'll explain why later in the podcast, kind of giving you an idea of our mandate. But short answer, yes, very, very busy.
Awesome. Okay, to get us started, I know we're hinting already at things to come, but can you give us an overview of the Rental Protection Fund and why was it created?
Sure, I'll do it in a bit of a long form narrative answer. The fund was founded on a simple concept, the idea that the most affordable housing we have is the housing we've already got. And the reality is that affordable housing, what we call naturally occurring affordable housing, is constantly at risk due to a variety of different threats, including redevelopment, disinvestment, and rapid rent escalation. And the easiest way to conceive of these buildings, these naturally occurring affordable housing buildings, is that 3 to 4 story wood frame walk up. They're everywhere here in Metro Vancouver, but they're also in communities as small as Port Hardy, on northern Vancouver Island, where there's 4,000 people. I've seen buildings like this in communities where there's 500. Most of these buildings were constructed in the 1960s, the 1970s, and people have been living in these buildings for decades, tenants paying 50, 60% below market rates. And that delta, the difference between market and the rents that they're paying, contributes to the underlying risk that these buildings face. People view these as investments as a means of both kicking existing tenants out and putting higher paying tenants in, or simply tearing the buildings down. The reality is, for every new affordable home that is built in the province, 4 more are lost to investors, conversions, demolitions, and rent increases. We've lost over 100,000 homes over the last 7 years. And our fund was largely created in response to this through a historic initial investment from the province of British Columbia, $500 million to buy up and protect these existing affordable multifamily rental buildings. And over the last year and a half, we've been busy. We've purchased 35 of these properties, over 1,500 units, 3,000 renters across the province, buildings that rent out on average, again, 50 to 60% below market rates. In Burnaby, for example, where I'm from, adjacent to Vancouver from those not from Metro Vancouver. At one point, Burnaby had some of the highest rents in all of Canada, in all of North America, if you compare it to kind of per income basis. And for a 1-bedroom, those rents were approaching $2,800, $2,900, which is an extraordinary sum. And the buildings that we've been purchasing in communities, much like Burnaby, are renting out at 50% below that. It's really the core of our mandate, is identifying those buildings and protecting them and putting them in the hands of the community housing sector.
Okay, and we heard a little bit about how this got started with partnerships in the government. I'm wondering, though, how does the Rental Protection Fund work to support nonprofit housing organizations in securing affordable housing?
That's a great question, Michelle. I think that the backbone, the foundation of affordable housing in this province is the community housing sector and the nonprofits that provide such an essential service to the hundreds of thousands of families that need that affordable housing acutely. In British Columbia, over 75% of all affordable housing stock is currently owned or operated by nonprofits. And there's a dazzling variety of these groups that serve innumerable mandates. We, as a fund, partner with the community housing sector and many of these nonprofit groups, not just to protect existing affordable housing, but also to deliver affordable housing. It's something that we're very excited about, because it's not just the units that we purchase. When these units do turn over, when they become vacant, it gives these nonprofits an opportunity to place tenants aligned with their core mandates. And the easiest way to describe that, I guess, is providing examples. I'd encourage your audience to check out our website, rentalprotectionfund.ca. My comms director is going to get mad at me. I forget our socials, but it's a great place to start, because we have a series of case studies, some of our more profound impact examples across the province. Some of them that I'll give, though, are one of our groups, Aunt Leah's Properties and Aunt Leah's Foundation, work with young women and single mothers transitioning out of British Columbia's foster care system. It's a very challenging period, and Aunt Leah's mandate is to provide critical affordable housing and wraparound services for these individuals. And they purchased a building through us in North Burnaby along Hastings Street, where they can provide rents as low as $500 a month for these young women and girls as they transition out of that foster care system, and provide them the services they need to truly become independent. We also work with groups such as New Vista Society, that works with seniors across the province, those on fixed income who, and the reality is, Michelle, if these seniors are displaced from their homes, they have nowhere to go. They've been paying rents probably a fraction of market rates for decades, and they aren't able to go back to work to make up that difference. So New Vista is just one of many of our nonprofits that fulfill a critical gap in that housing policy, providing housing for the people that need it most. We're very proud of our groups. You can see all 30 of our pre-qualified nonprofits on our website. There's a dazzling variety. We work a lot with a variety of Indigenous-led housing nonprofits as well. And we're very proud of the work that they do and we are able to do through them.
Amazing. And I'll make sure that we have links to everything in our show notes, both the social media, so comms directors are happy. The website sounds like a great variety. Yeah. We always have things covered on that side, so everyone's pleased across the board. Knowing that you're doing such important work and connecting in communities for people that are facing vulnerabilities, and housing is such an area that can create further vulnerability in life. I'm wondering, aside from personal vulnerability, what are some of the biggest challenges in preserving affordable rental housing, and how does your team address this?
Oh, goodness, Michelle, do we have a couple hours to go through a list?
I know.
The reality is there's no silver bullet to affordable housing. I think that's something that all levels of government can agree upon. There is a series of complementary approaches. We are all but one of those complementary approaches, but we're a unique approach and one that really hasn't been considered up until recently. Conversations around this province's housing crisis have largely focused on the need for new affordable housing and the construction of rental supply, which are both very important things. Governments at all levels have invested significant capital and resources to build and incentivize the creation of much needed housing to support that growth and address housing affordability. But the reality is the preservation of existing affordable housing is an equally important and cost-effective complementary approach to achieve that housing affordability goal in a way that, when you build, for example, you don't want to be undermined by loss. I referenced a statistic earlier, which is to say that for every new unit of affordable housing, we lose 4. We're trying to slow that erosion and slow that undermining effort so we can both protect and create new affordable housing hand in hand with the province's existing housing policy and initiative. On a more tangible side, the biggest challenge that we face day to day is the fact that we're a province-wide fund. We're not just the Metro Vancouver Fund. We're not just the Victoria Fund. We acquire in communities as small as a couple hundred people, all the way up to Vancouver, which last time I checked is closer to 1.5 million. And every market is different. Every geography is different. Every building is different. And recognizing those risks and underwriting these deals and the preservation of these homes individually comes with a lot of challenges. Understanding the local vacancy rate, understanding the risks involved in acquiring what are older buildings. I mentioned most of these were built in the 1960s and 1970s. To be honest with you, Michelle, some of them have a little hair on them. They're a little old. They have character, as my parents would like to say, but they require work. And understanding those risks from the outset and pricing those deals appropriately is important for us because we are, in effect, stewarding taxpayer dollars. That initial $500 million investment did come from the province, and we want to make sure that every dollar we invest yields maximum social good. And that's where kind of the geography piece falls into play, is because we look at 100 different markets across the province at any given month, and hundreds of individual multifamily deals. So understanding those unique geographic contexts intimately is an important piece of what we do. And the other piece, and this is what Cameron is going to talk about at length, I've mentioned a lot about acquiring multifamily buildings, but ancillary to that core mandate is the education and advocacy piece. Even though we focus predominantly on buying these buildings, I'm really proud of the work that we've done on this Tenant Policy Atlas. It's a great tool and something I won't steal Cameron's thunder here because he has some great context to provide on this. But we like a two-pronged approach, one that leads to kind of specific strategic interventions in the market to protect that affordable housing. But the other piece too is engaging with the broader renter public to tell them, what they're entitled to and the protections that are in place in their respective communities. So that in essence is the challenges that we face. So if we had a couple hours, we could sit down over some whiskey and I'd tell you the day to day. But this is not a therapy session. This is a podcast. So we'll stick to the core pieces.
Okay. And I think there's still a lot more that we could dive into on any day. And that's just one province. Looking across the country, we'd be here for months. Thinking that data really plays a core role in some of this understanding of what's happening around us, regardless of how in-depth of a calculation is or how small it is. What the Rental Protection Fund, I think, has done surrounding this policy atlas is something that really excites me. With this, I'm going to throw this one over to Cameron, I think, this time. So knowing that the Rental Protection Fund has developed a tenant policy atlas, can you explain a bit more what it is and how it supports the mission?
Sure. So the Tenant Policy Atlas is one of our first publicly accessible GIS-enabled web apps developed in-house. And so what it does is it visualizes tenant relocation policies across the province. What a tenant relocation policy is I think a couple of other municipalities across, there's several in Ontario, I believe, I think maybe one or two elsewhere in the province. But they're quite popular as pieces of policy in BC. What they are is a municipality lays out certain provisions that renters in that community have when the building that they live in is slated for redevelopment by the owner. So province-wide, we have a piece of legislation called the Residential Tenancy Act, or RTA, which essentially says if in this situation, you are entitled to 1 month of rent, which is not a lot. If you are an older renter in, for instance, Vancouver, if to use to Bren's example, one of the New Vista people that New Vista works with, and if you are evicted for a redevelopment and you receive 1 month of rent, that's not going to do anything for you. That's probably about $1,000, and all of a sudden, when you're facing $2,800 for a 1-bedroom apartment, it's not going to cover anything. So these policies are intended to be sort of an extra bulwark to help people in these situations. They often enshrine things, for instance, like if you are facing redevelopment, you get anywhere from 1 month of extra rent to, in some cases, there's a community called White Rock south of here, where you receive 44 months of rent if as long as you've lived in that building for 40 years, which is not unheard of. So there's that. There's also, you might get money to help you move depending on how large your apartment is. You also might get right of first refusal in the new building, which essentially stipulates, okay, well, you are entitled to rent again in the building that replaced your old one at a certain rate, be it your old rental rate or some portion below what average rents in the community are. So this is a big patchwork of stuff. It's heavily dependent on, of course, where you live, which is spatial information. To give an example, I live here in Vancouver, and so does my aunt. However, my aunt lives in what's called the Broadway area. What the Broadway area is essentially, long story short, a long portion, section of the city that is being slated for redevelopment. And so she's been very concerned about, well, the building next to me was bought with intentions to do this. And she and her husband have been very nervous about this. And this was, I was like, oh, well, cool, I'm making this app. And I got to talk to her about, okay, well, you, even though you rent in the secondary market because you are renting this condo, you are covered by this in a way that you actually wouldn't be if you lived outside of the Broadway area. And so being able to sort of spatially represent this, because she lives in the specific part of town where this policy does apply to her and I don't, for instance, being able to both spatially represent this and then represent what's actually different about the policies, that's been really, really exciting. With the Rental Protection Fund, the core of our work is renters. So we want to be able to, and this is part of our sort of outreach to, provide education and increase our overall impact.
Thinking about that and how it's going to make things more accessible, I'm wondering, to Bren, is there anything you want to add on there?
Yeah, I mean, Cameron's done a fantastic job at consolidating dozens of municipal policies across the province. And the reality is, these documents, these policies are often deeply hidden within 400-page documents. The Broadway plan itself is about 500 pages. The average renter, regardless of whether they're a student currently attending a university or a senior who's lived in these buildings for 40, 50 years, they may not be able to navigate through pages and pages of local government websites to find these documents, read through the documents, and understand at a fundamental level what they're entitled to. Cameron's created, on the Esri platform, I should add, a very simple tool wherein a renter can simply enter how long they've lived in a building. I've lived in this building for X number of years, and as a result, I'm entitled to Y. It's a powerful tool, and one, most importantly, that is accessible to everybody.
Yeah, and I think pointing out that this is something that people can go out and use has such a big impact. I know where I live out here in Nova Scotia, I rent, and our rental protection in our area is quite different. I know, like in Ontario, you can have pets. Out here, fairly common that you can't have pets. But then you have things like we have very commonly a 1-year term fixed lease that hey, the next one comes up, you're not protected anymore, but we have nothing that really stops that. So I think having things in one space that makes it accessible, saving me from having to go look through everything would be fantastic. But I'm not in BC. You guys are. I'm wondering though, how does this then go further from just the individual level to how does the Atlas help inform decision making for policymakers or housing advocates and nonprofits?
Yeah, one of the things I was really fascinated by when I was doing this research is that we didn't find a comparable public comprehensive resource summarizing these policies. A lot of organizations, there's tenant advocacy, there's government organizations have some amount of them, but he was like, okay, well, we have 4 or 5 over here on this website, we have 6 or 7 on this website, and so being able to collate all of these into one province-wide resource, I think was the key goal here. And I think being able to collate those, it offers the ability to fairly easily compare between municipalities. You can highlight specific locations where a municipality isn't a municipality doesn't have strong policies compared to another location. So, for instance, on the island, there the what we consider Victoria is actually 13 different municipalities, and then what their tenant policies are heavily varies between the 13. So it's possible to go through and essentially say, well, it's interesting. Highlands doesn't have anything, but Esquimalt does, and being able to look at that sort of thing. The other thing the other way I think this helps inform is that these policies are living documents. Municipalities are constantly updating them. And so part of the app's benefit is that a lot of the lists of these policies exist as a PDF with like an Excel chart. And it's difficult to update these sorts of things quickly and easily. So the app was designed to be modular in the sense that when someone updates their policy, I can just go and say, well, okay, here's the new things that this entails. I'm going to, in the back end, it's a layer, and I'm just going to go and change what's in the field.
From a policymaker perspective, I might get in trouble for saying this, but as a professional planner myself, I can confidently say that planning policy is, to some degree, a little derivative. Maybe a nicer way of saying that is they take inspiration liberally from other sources. And by Cameron consolidating all these policies into one document, our genuine hope is that policymakers and local government planners can look around in kind of that geographic context and understand who's done what and how has that been successful, how has it failed, what can we incorporate from what they experienced and the lessons that they've learned. That's important for us, and it's obviously important for them, especially as many of these municipalities currently work on updating that tenant protection bylaw as nature or as a product of recent provincial direction.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point out there that specifically going further and providing this information together, it is a framework for others to be able to work from. Policies don't just apply to one spot. We're going to be able to learn from each other. So I think highlighting that is very important. It's what we promote within GIS all the time, and like geographic approach, that we want to see that feedback of what we're doing helping benefit others. Now, hearing that there's kind of a pattern there, like, great, other people are going to be able to start to take notice. Were there any other patterns that stood out while assembling the atlas and exploring the data? Were there any surprising findings?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we looked at the most surprising thing to me was if you look at a list of municipalities in BC by population, you would expect, well, okay, the ones at the top probably have more renters and thus probably are more likely to have a tenant relocation policy. But that's not necessarily true. That's true in a lot of cases, but some of the really large municipalities in British Columbia, like Kelowna and Kamloops, which both have about 150,000 people in them, neither of them had a policy on the books, which was really fascinating. We've acquired in Kamloops. We're looking at acquiring in Kelowna, and there is rental stock there. And even though there is a significant amount of renters, the fact that they didn't have that was really interesting to me. I know they are working on creating their tenant relocation policy. This isn't us being like, you should fix this. Mm-hmm. But what was really fascinating is that some of the smallest municipalities in British Columbia do in fact have tenant relocation policies on the books. One example that I found really interesting is Kitimat. Kitimat is a really small, not that small, but 8,000 people-ish district municipality. It's actually closer to Alaska than it is to me right now. BC's big, as is Canada. But what it is, it's a very natural resource focused community, and that's what most of its economy is based on. And so they do have this rental stock, and they're currently undergoing a sort of a community, a sort of community boom, I guess you could call it, but where there is an increased pressure to create more housing in the community. And this sort of older purpose-built rental stock is sort of the ideal, is often sort of the ideal location that you would like to redevelop. And so what the city is being very proactive in saying, well, okay, this is, our below market purpose-built rental stock is in danger because of this increased pressure. And we're going to start developing policies to, help mitigate the effects of this increased pressure. So it was really fascinating to me that, a Kitimat, which has, 1/12 of the population of some of these larger cities, has one while these larger cities don't. And I guess what that really speaks to is that the housing crisis is not just located in Vancouver. It's not just located in big cities. It is a province-wide issue.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's worth pointing out, that it isn't just one area that we're focusing on, that this is a larger issue. You're noticing these patterns. I think it's really important what your application has been putting forward to provide that information of where there are absences, where people can advocate for themselves and advocate within their communities for their protections. And not to say that that application isn't doing enough, but are there any other GIS applications that you're using? Because from the work I'm hearing about, you're using things with GIS in such innovative ways to provide that connection between people and housing and resources. I just want to know if there's anything else going on that we should be aware of.
Absolutely. So one of my other big project here at the fund is being able to take take the information that we have and spatially enable it and help us inform the decision making that we're doing. So the other thing I've created here at the fund is what I call SHARP, the Strategic Housing Acquisition Resource Platform, acronym mine. And what it helps us do is it contextualizes our potential acquisitions. So when a building is put forward to us by one of our applicants, or a broker comes to us and says, we think that you might be interested in purchasing this building, we want to look at it and say, okay, well, what's next door? Is there something that helps is there an opportunity here? Is this located, for instance, next to other nonprofit housing? Is this located next to land that the government owns? And can we use that as an opportunity to partner with some other organization and expand future affordable housing? And this helps us, get the best possible value for, the taxpayer dollar that we're using.
Like any good realtor will tell you, the three most important things with real estate are location, 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 which is why GIS as kind of that location-driven data tool is so important for the work that we do. We as a fund don't just want to acquire buildings on the periphery of communities. We want to buy buildings that are integrated into the very community fabric of the towns, villages, and cities that we're buying in. And a real-world example of that is we look for adjacencies with key community amenities, schools, parks, transit, daycares. Those are all critical considerations for us. We also look at, geographic comparables, the pricing of other sales in the area to ensure that we're getting best possible value for money. But as Cameron said, one of the more interesting pieces for us is that strategic adjacency piece. Of course, we're preserving affordable housing, but the legacy considerations for us are equally as important. What will happen to this housing in 20, 30, 40 years when it reaches the end of its useful economic life? Will there be an opportunity to build more affordable housing because we're investing these assets into the hands of community housing sector nonprofits? We have a comprehensive database inventory, thanks to a number of different sources, but mainly our friends at the province, of local government and provincial and federal owned land, which has led to some really interesting conversations with these stakeholders as to how can we redevelop in a way that provides protection for existing tenants, allows them perhaps even new and better suited housing, but also leads to the multiplication of existing affordable housing. And an example I'd give, I'm from the city of Burnaby, as you can probably tell, I've relied upon it a lot. We purchased 3 buildings in the city of Burnaby owned by a real estate investment trust. And these buildings were unique in that not only were they 3-bedroom units, 75 of them, and 3-bedroom large family-oriented units, but there was also a daycare built into the building itself as well. But what made these, I think, so exciting for us was their adjacencies to the city of Burnaby's vacant land base. City of Burnaby is a very progressive, proactive municipality when it comes to affordable housing. And we saw a lot of opportunities in buying these buildings that were directly next to several acres of vacant land and hopefully lead toward a partnership between the nonprofit that we had chosen to own these buildings and the city at large. And what's being contemplated right now, in its infancy, I should add, is the creation of an additional 450, 600 affordable housing units unlocked by nature of our initial investment in those buildings, which is so exciting to us because we don't simply just want to protect, we also want to increase the supply of affordable housing. It's so important right now, especially the way that rents are going, that we can contribute to the underlying rental supply, regardless of whether it's in the short term in 5 years or the long term in 20. And Cameron's tool, the Strategic Housing Acquisition Resource Platform, great acronym, what that enables us to do is to gain insights into those adjacencies and that future potential, as well as ensuring that the stuff that we're buying is very much in the community, because people who've been living in these buildings have contributed to those communities for decades. And the prospect of them being forced out of their homes, but not just out of their homes, often out of their communities, their neighborhoods, their cities even, we see on a regular basis. And there's nothing more fear-inducing and anxiety-inducing than seeing that for sale sign go up in front of your building on a Sunday morning when you've lived there for 20 plus years and you have no idea what's going to happen. And that's largely the reason why the Rental Protection Fund was established in the first place, to protect those renters and to really proactively intervene in situations where that affordability could be lost.
Okay, and aside from having a great snappy name that has a great acronym, if another organization wanted to develop similar GIS-driven tools, what advice would you give them?
You should check out Esri. No, I'm kidding. I mean, it's been such a great tool, and I really do appreciate. I should acknowledge that Esri was kind enough to give our organization a charitable license. It's gone very far in allowing us to really further our mandate on a tight budget. So thank you first and foremost. But the other piece here, and what a lot of these tools are meant to do, is to basically democratize data. We know that a lot of these organizations already have access to the same resources that we do. These policies exist. Sometimes they're public, sometimes they're not. Having worked with the local government for 5 years, I know the enormous repository of data that these groups have access to, but it's public, or it's private, I should say. It's private, it's often hidden or locked. What I'd encourage other organizations to do is to democratize that information, make it publicly available, because groups like us, groups like our nonprofits, and even members of the public rely upon that information to make decisions and understand what they're entitled to as renters in this city.
Awesome. And I think that's a good call out. I personally am a big fan of open data sites and collaborative practices. We have the Community Map of Canada as an Esri Canada initiative where we're specifically looking at increasing collaboration between municipalities across the country to better provide a Canadian-based map that has almost up-to-date as we can information. Like it updates every 72 hours, I think we're at. From all of these data sources together, we've got data coming from all across Canada. We want to see it out there. Top that you have those open data sites where having the licensing called out that this is data that can be used is important so that we can all use it for our analysis. Now, we heard from kind of the policy side. What are the implications of this? Cameron, any thoughts to add here on what people can take away and maybe use some advice for themselves?
I mean, I think, the huge takeaway making this modular, making this easy to update has been, I think, my key takeaway. Just because, while I was developing the app, I think 5 different municipalities put out their revised tenant relocation policy. It does happen fairly often. Being able to having created this in a way that made it easy to update was extremely helpful. And I think, in this one, from the data side, I think the most obvious takeaway I have from my time here in developing this stuff is that open data is very much your friend. We do our own value adding to the data that we create, but the original source of all of our spatial layers is a publicly accessible parcel map. It's a listing of every daycare in the province that the government puts out. So all of these things, this is the stuff that we use. And being able and having that has been, we wouldn't be able to do it without open data.
Yeah. So the real key I'm hearing here is that we all just need to work together and share, right? Sharing is caring. Okay. Glad to know that we have a nice little soundbite takeaway of, hey, sharing is caring in this particular instance. With that does bring us to the end of our questions. I want to give one last opportunity. Any call outs or things you want to leave our listeners on? Any big points if they should be thinking about as they go into their maybe work day or weekend?
Oh, that's a challenging one, Michelle. I guess reconceiving the notion of achieving housing affordability, not just to focus on new affordable housing, but also to recognize what we have, the current affordable housing stock, and the pressures and challenges that it currently faces. It's a bit of a unique and novel idea, one that was born in the province of British Columbia and has since been adopted in other places, including Nova Scotia. Michelle, I know you're from Nova Scotia. We hosted some of your policymakers about a year ago, very smart folks. And recently, of course, the federal government has implemented their own eponymous Canadian Rental Protection Fund, borrowing a couple words from our name, of course. But it's increasingly been recognized as a very important and complementary means of achieving housing affordability. And hopefully those conversations will continue to be forwarded and advanced as these things develop over time.
Amazing. And I think that's a great point for us to wrap up on here. So thinking about everything, who knew that maps could be such a game changer for housing security? The Tenant Policy Atlas is proof that GIS isn't just about points and polygons. It's about people, policies, and protecting homes. A huge thank you again to the team at the Rental Protection Fund for giving us a peek behind the map. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep thinking geographically.